All right, so respiration. We're working on it. We'll get it. Last chapter.
That's gonna be on the test.
This is the last chapter of the test, chapter 8, photosynthesis. It's a bit shorter than chapter 7, for what that's worth.
Shoot.
It's just 7A with the test, right?
6, 7, 8.
6, 7, 8.
Yeah, 6 was like kind of a bunch of intro stuff. We were just talking about like ATP and energetics and enzymes and all the stuff that we just keep talking about. So, yeah. So 6, 7, and 8 are the next test. Chapter 8, photosynthesis. So we'll just do the first couple sections today. Not letting anything too heavy on. So we're going to walk basically through the photosynthesis reaction, right? We're going to kind of go through it like very superficially a couple of times, and then next week we'll like pull the whole thing apart. All right, so we're going to talk a bit about photosynthesis in general and the structure of chloroplasts, because they're going to be kind of critical to how this whole thing goes down, right? So the whole reason that life works is that Earth is not a closed system, right? We have this constant input of energy from the sun. Photosynthesizers are able to collect that energy in the form of photons, right? And create molecules that the rest of us that are kind of limited to cellular respiration are then able to use, right? So photosynthesis combines carbon dioxide, which we are conveniently kind of putting off all the time, and water to make glucose and oxygen, which we conveniently need all of the time, right? There is an exception, anoxygenic photosynthesis, right? Kind of like we talked about anaerobic respiration. Doesn't produce oxygen, some bacteria do. We're not really going to talk about this in here, so don't really worry about anoxygenic photosynthesis. We're going to focus on oxygenic photosynthesis, which is what plants do. Also algae and cyanobacteria. We're going to narrow our photosynthesis talk way down. We're basically just going to talk about photosynthesis in land plants, right? Which takes energy from the sun, can produce chemical potential energy, right? And in land plants, photosynthesis occurs mainly in the leaves, but specifically and only in the chloroplasts, right? So this could vary from plant to plant, right? Like cacti have super reduced leaves, so their chloroplasts are in the stem. But wherever the chloroplasts are, that is where photosynthesis is happening, right? Photosynthesis just happens in the chloroplasts. Cool. Where do chloroplasts come from again? Why do plants have chloroplasts?
For the leaves,
For the leaves, for photosynthesis.
but sometimes it may not happen like that, like a cactus, which is in the stem. Boom.
Yes, those are true things. Where did the chloroplasts come from? What are they descended from?
Molecules.
Why do they have, right, they're these weird little double membrane guys with their own DNA that replicate themselves because
They don't have a nucleus. They don't have a nucleolus. They don't have a center membrane cell.
what's that theory? Where did they come from? How did they happen to be in this cell?
Because everything is made up of cells.
We are making true statements
It's not a true statement.
in the vicinity of the answer, and yet somehow.
Did you say it?
No, I have not said it.
No, she ain't gonna say it unless we get it. Big on Zoom, I mean.
I know.
Is it a eukaryote?
There we go.
So plants are eukaryotes. What's a chloroplast descended from?
Prokaryote.
Yes, a prokaryote. What is that theory?
There's more.
Okay. Other way around.
Oh, yeah, that eukaryotes engulfed prokaryotes, that they became endosymbionts, as it were.
Say it, see?
Is the endosymbiotic theory? It absolutely 100% is. Yeah. Chapter
I
4.
gotta do my egg fry, gosh.
All right. So Chloroplasts are descended from prokaryotes that were engulfed by some ancestor of plants that decided not to eat them and instead decided to use them to make energy. So they are doing photosynthesis, right? So photosynthesis occurs in 3 stages, right? We're going to capture light, step 1. We're going to use the energy from the light to make ATP and reduce some NADP to NADPH. So this is just another electron carrier, which I find fairly easy to remember. We had NAD, we're cool with that. Now we have NAD that's in plants. I don't think that's actually what the P stands for, but it makes it easy for me to remember, and that's what I stick with, right? So we have NAD for plants, and we're going to convert to NADPH. Well, ultimately, I suppose so, when you're eating the plants later. We're going to use the ATP and the NADPH to make CO2 into glucose, basically. And that is photosynthesis. We're going to add some details in, but like, that's it. All right. And all of this is happening in the chloroplast. Now, we break these, well, we not even break, we group these, there we go, the other way, right? These 3 stages into kind of 2 chunks. So light capturing and making NADPH and ATP, we lump together and we refer to these as the light dependent reactions because they depend on light. Easy enough.
And is that when a plant, like you see it like Lowe's or something, it'll have like put in the sunlight? Is that why?
I mean, that is ultimately why. Yeah. So there's a lot of variation, and we won't talk about like lots of it. I mean, it's not plant phys. But depending on where plants live and what they're adapted to, whether they need lots of light, whether they need light and dark or a little light.
That's what kills them, right?
Lots of light? No light.
Depending on.
Right, kind of depending on, right, because some plants will like do photosynthesis like all the time. Some of them will do part of it in the daytime and part of it in the nighttime. Right, and it all kind of depends on what kind of environments or light levels they're adapted to, right? But at some point, a plant needs to have access to light, whether it's a lot of light or a little light, right? And so those are the light dependent reactions where it's actually collecting the energy from the sun. And so then we call the 3rd stage the light independent reaction. And this is actually when it's using all of this energy it's collected to fix carbon, right? So where it's synthesizing organic molecules from carbon dioxide. These reactions don't need light, right? The energy is already collected and processed. So we call these light independent reactions. Some plants will actually just do this at night, but it depends on the plant. That's like the end of the chapter. We'll come back around to that. So photosynthesis roughly divided into light dependent and light independent reactions, right? Looks roughly like this. Nah. I mean, you should be able to intuit it a bit, right? Carbon dioxide and water,
H2O, carbon dioxide.
right? Plants take in carbon dioxide, water, and light. They create glucose. They release oxygen. They make a little bit of water, right? Like. All right, so that is generally what is happening. Noted it's basically respiration in reverse, right? We breathe in oxygen, we drink water, we eat glucose, we don't put off light, that would be cool. And we release carbon dioxide in water, right?
It'd be like butterfly.
Yeah, you could bioluminesce a bit, it would be fun. Yeah. But yeah, so this is one of those things where, right, it's the pathway going both ways, and plants are gonna do this, right? It's no use for them to make glucose if they can't also, right, break it apart and use it, right? So this is one of those where photosynthesis and respiration are actually kind of mirrored processes. So chloroplasts, these guys again, these weird little beings, similar to mitochondria, right? These little kind of products of this endosymbiotic event have lots of membranes, right? They've got this big double membrane. Chloroplasts are like filled with folded membranes, right? The mitochondria was just kind of this loosey-goosey membrane in the middle. These guys have huge stacks of thick membranes of thylakoid membranes that they use to generate ATP. Yeah. All right. So you've got these thylakoid membranes, they're generating ATP, and then we've got this kind of jelly semi-liquid around them called the stroma, right? So thylakoid membrane system surrounded in goop, right? Important goop. It contains a bunch of enzymes, and this is where glucose gets synthesized, is in the stroma of the chloroplast. So all of the light collecting, energy converting is happening in these membranes, right? And then all that energy comes out here to make organic molecules. All right. So that thylakoid membrane, right? It's just a membrane, it's just a phospholipid bilayer, not new in that sense, but it's just this continued layer that's kind of folded. It ends up always kind of looking like these little coin or pancake stacks, right? These little stacked discs of membranes. And we call these stacks of membranes grana, right? And so again, all of these stacks of membranes is where that photon capture energy conversion is going to be happening, right in here. And then all that stuff is going to go out here into this kind of liquidy surrounding stuff where we're actually going to start making glucose. Cool. All right, the membrane is full of chlorophyll and some other pigments. Chlorophyll is just a green pigment, right? And so these pigments are clustered in these membranes, right? So you've got these little clusters of pigments, and these little kind of clusters of pigments are going to work together to pull photons, right? To pull the energy from photons as light is hitting them. And we call these little pigment clusters photosystems, little light systems, right? They're little light energy capturing systems, right? So we've got these little photosystems kind of stuck in the membrane. And so each pigment molecule clustered together in this membrane is capable of capturing photons, right? Little packets of energy, right? The energy coming from the sun is in the form of photons, and these little pigments can capture that energy and excite electrons that can then be used to generate ATP. Cool. All right. So we'll end today being a little less micro for a minute, just because I find old science kind of fun and weird. So how did we figure out that photosynthesis is happening? Because it's not as intuitive as it could be, maybe. All right, so we're going to talk about experiments that kind of led us to figure out that photosynthesis is a thing. So imagine yourself in the 16th century, bored, staring at plants.
So bored.
So bored. There's nothing.
No.
You're probably just sitting there tatting lace until you go blind. It's fine. So you look at plants. It's the most interesting thing going on in your life. Plants grow in soil, plants don't eat, plants get big. Makes no sense if you don't know anything else, right? So the general assumption was that plants must be getting food from the soil somehow, right? They've got roots in the soil. It's like the only thing they're interacting with. They must be pulling food from the soil, like eating dirt or something, right? It's like a hypothesis, right? Do they? No, they don't. Great dirt. Love some dirt. So this dude, you don't need to memorize his name, but it's one of those nice, intense 16th century names. Jan Baptista van Helmont, Belgian, I think, perhaps. Got the Belgian look to him. I have no idea. He designed an experiment to test this hypothesis. Brilliant, complicated science. Weigh a baby willow tree. Weigh some dirt. Place tree in dirt. Water tree for several years. Science was also really slow, 16th century. Collect some data after several years. Tree had gained about 75 kilograms. That's like, I think that's like a knee, roughly, a tree. The soil was only 57 grams lighter. I don't know what 57, like, what is the hamster, like 10 grams? I don't know, I'm bad at this. Soil was some amount lighter, not much. Conclusion.
You got a picture of the tree?
I do not have a picture of the tree, unfortunately. Tree not eating dirt. Substance in plant also probably not from water, right? Because it's the tree would then just be like made, if that's all that it was. Something else, there's got to be some other thing making the plant. Enter this fellow, look at that fellow, Joseph Priestley.
Handsome guy.
Right, he looks, look at those bangs. My goodness. All right, 18th century, this fellow conducted the complicated and bizarre, and I don't know what the rest of his life was. Candle bell jar mint mouse experiment. It's a good one. It's weird. Bell jars, those Victorians and their bell jars, right? You know what a bell jar is, right? Think like you put them over like plants and stuff. They're
Beauty and the
cute.
Beast.
Yes, yes, Beauty and the Beast. Critical plot point was the bell jar. So, which actually makes no sense, kind of given what we know. It would have
Yeah,
given.
when they die, not be all blossomed and like
Yeah,
they were.
but it was magic. It was a magic flower, so it doesn't really.
Which my life is actually.
All right, so Joseph noticed if you put a candle, lit the candle, put a bell jar in it, on it, candle would go out. Why? We know why. Why does the candle go out?
Oxygen deficiency.
Runs out of oxygen. Cool, that's fine. He's like, not enough. I'm gonna put a mouse in the bell jar.
Yeah. Murder something.
Right, it's not good science if nothing dies. Oh gosh. Mouse and a candle in the bell jar. Candle goes out, mouse dies. Why? There's no oxygen. He's just bored. All right. He's like, all right, let's up it. I'm gonna put a mint in with the candle. Candle doesn't go out. Why does candle not go out? We know. Candle doesn't go out because,
Nobody blows it out.
or option 2,
There's no wind, it's just suction.
or the plant is producing oxygen that the fire needs, right? That's combustion. Remember combustion from the last chapter. All right, so mint and candle. We can keep a candle lit. Again, Joseph isn't satisfied. Let's put every freaking thing in the bell jar. Right? One, I find this wholly unrealistic. How, like that mouse is everything's gonna be on fire,
The mouse is probably burning.
right? But if
But it's
you,
science, and that-
but science, candle, mint plant, mouse, theoretically, nothing dies until it all sets itself on fire. Because, why? We know why. Why?
Or the
the mouse
candle
could eat the
burned
mint.
the mouse.
The plant is producing oxygen. The mouse is producing
CO2.
carbon dioxide. Yes, CO2. The plant is consuming
All of those things,
CO2, right?
and growing.
And growing, and the mouse is consuming the oxygen, right? You've made the whole photosynthesis respiration cycle right here.
Is
The
the mouse
candle is kind of
Is
superfluous.
the mouse eating the mint to stay alive?
I don't know what the time frame was for the mouse remaining. I can't imagine it was very long because there was a fire and a plant and an animal under a glass jar.
I know it got hot in there.
It had to. But what were you gonna say something, Chris? Okay.
I was gonna say, does the plant like die without the mouse? Just the candle and the plant?
The candle would
Eventually?
last long, the plant would last longer, I assume. I assume this was like a matter of hours. I don't think he was, I mean, I don't know what he was doing ultimately, but after days, right, everything's dead. The candle burns out, the mouse starves, and the plant dries out. But the cycling of oxygen and carbon dioxide remains. So, okay. Joseph's conclusion, the mint restores the air. Close enough, Joseph. Right. It's providing oxygen, which the candle and the mouse are both consuming. Subsequently, the mouse is putting off carbon dioxide that the plant is consuming. Okay. 200 more years of plant science happens that we're going to just gloss over to get us to where we are now. They get less interesting after all that. We know light-dependent reactions produce oxygen from water that the plant takes in. The plant harvests energy from light to oxidize water, right? To transfer electrons, to generate ATP. And then in the light-independent reactions is able to use that ATP, right, and NADPH to create organic molecules, i.e. substance. Yeah? Right, this is that thing we talked about way back. Plants can fix carbon, right? There's carbon in the air right now. There's carbon. I'm producing carbon into the air. The plants can take those molecules and make stuff out of them, can fix the carbon into solid chemical potential energy molecules that it can then use for energy. All right? And again, in a nutshell, that is photosynthesis. Yeah? All right, the next thing to pick apart is going to be pigments. It's going to get a little complicated-ish, so I'm going to leave that for Monday. All right, remember you've got a lecture journal and a quiz open on Canvas.